I'm here with teacher Bogdan Radasanu, and we are here to talk about the possibilities for expansion of consciousness and spiritual transformation on the Tantric path. In the next 30 minutes or so, we'll be learning not just about the key tenets of Tantra, but we'll be looking at the practicalities and how Bogdan created amazing results in his life. Welcome, Bogdan.
Lovely to meet you again, Vivian.
Lovely to meet you. Can you go back all those years and remember your very first Tantra class?
Yes, I do remember. It's quite a while ago. I'll not mention the number of years, but it's a long time ago. And what I remember was a little bit of an intro with me attending some lectures with some of my friends that are already on the path, and they were attending these courses. But I very clearly remember one moment, the very first yoga practice, and for me was a step into what I consider to be the inner universe. It was a step of looking inside, and I remember being asked to close the eyes and do some exercise with the eyes closed, and being asked to feel some things or to explore some things. And that for me was, I just realized in 20 years of my life I never looked inside. It was a very clear step into this inner universe that was totally alien for me or unknown. It was kind of a universe that was never explored, never looked at, I never even asked myself what's inside me. And that was for me, I remember that feeling of, hey, there is a part of me I never looked at. It was shifting from constantly looking outside and explaining the world and interacting with people to something that finally was me, but I didn't know was just the first step.
Was that very strange? I mean, was it a difficult habit to break, to constantly referring to yourself as being outside?
It's a very good question. I remember I could share one little success I had maybe 2 months into the practice. I was even, of course, being part of a group practicing yoga and having a teacher was a bit easier in the class, but I remember this feeling of, even if I close my eyes, I know exactly what happens around me in every single moment. I remember at home, I knew where the furniture was, where the objects were in the room and so on, and there was this constant connection with the outside. I could never disconnect. And the first sign of success was when once practicing at home, I think it was one evening, and I opened my eyes and I just had this feeling that for 1 hour I completely forgot about the outside. And that for me was a small step forward, knowing that it's possible to spend time with myself completely disconnected from the noise and the agitation and the physical world. And that was, for me, I knew that it was possible.
And what was the benefit of spending that time inside yourself?
I would say first is just getting a break, a pause, putting pause on this constant agitation and also because I'm a very intellectual nature, and I've always been in science and computers, and at that time I was a student in university, and just taking a break from the constant noise, and that for me was a great thing. It took a while until I could say I was able to meditate, but nevertheless, even during the yoga practice, being a little bit easier to focus on was a big step forward from just having a little oasis of silence in my life. And then became a good habit, together with the studies, was a good addition to, let's say, mind regeneration and shifting the focus on the studies and focus on the outside world to having this time with myself, which I think is very important for all of us nowadays, even more so.
And now coming on to the expansion of consciousness, and that's a fantastic idea, and we all talk about it a lot. How can you verify that you are expanding your consciousness?
Now, probably my students know that I'm not using big words easily. So transformation, expansion of all of them are real, of course. And expansion of consciousness is something that you cannot talk about, but rather experience directly. And I can only share one way. Of course, there are many, and a very practical way to check is, for example, having a successful meditation. We always have, especially when I do group meditations, a little, let's say, conclusion time, or we say, now we come back. Now, of course, if the mind is still connected and agitated, the question will be, come back from what or from where? And there's, of course, no meaning to it. Whereas having a successful meditation where you either went very deeply inside your soul or your consciousness, or you expanded somewhere else and you felt bigger and beyond, far beyond the limitations of the body, the sensation is very clear. So exploring maybe some very abstract concepts in those meditations and having very clear insights and being connected to something much bigger than yourself, there is a very clear return into your body, even a certain shrinking back to the personality, the body, the sensation of you being in the room. So there is a clear distinction between where you went in that meditation and coming back to your normal self. Of course, that's just one experience. Of course, all of us, I hope all of us experience the state of being expanded in love and being connected and being unified with something bigger than us, which is the other one, or the love itself, or other forms of expansion, for example, being raptured in nature and going somewhere with this awe and with this beauty that we perceive out there. But definitely we do have in our lives, all of us, we have those moments of expansion, even, I don't know, being part of an artistic thing like movies or theater performance or in a concert and so on. I'm sure all of us, we had that, and definitely is accessible to us, and it's part of us.
That elevated sense of awareness where we feel completely alive,
yes,
and suddenly can see things differently.
And I would say even, I would stretch a bit this analogy and saying that being liberated by what the mind constantly tells us, because we're so identified and proud of what we know and who we are, and sometimes, of course, terribly limited and would even say terrorized by the content of our own minds. So having the possibility to step out of it, to step out of the default or the habitual emotions and mindsets, it's a great feeling of being bigger than what we think we are, what we feel we are in everyday life, of course.
So the road of your spiritual progress, your transformation, can you take us through some of the highlights, your trials and tribulations, the challenges you came up against?
Yes, I would say, especially if we go on this path of yoga practice, meditation practice, which of course is part of the bigger Tantra knowledge, there is a need of discipline, there is a need of cleaning up, there is a need of purification, and probably the biggest journey, and I would say the biggest hardship in the beginning, is to give ourselves the chance and even the opportunity in the context of stepping out of the defaults. For example, meditation. You sit there in meditation for a week, 2 weeks, nothing happens. Every day for 10 minutes, half an hour, 40 minutes, or whatever meditation you want to practice, there is still a big voice in your head, someone that constantly wants to sabotage the whole thing. You know, this doesn't work, this is it. And then you need to return. Let's say it's a mantra meditation. You need to say the mantra, listen to the mantra, however form of meditation, maybe it's the inner state of love, joy, and so on. And there is the mind constantly sabotaging the things. We have certain defaults, and we build them over years. Is the whole life experience, this persona and the personality that we build through repetition, through sometimes successes and sometimes traumas or sometimes losses. And that gets enforced every single time when we go through events like them. Now, any spiritual journey is, I would say, has a stage of demolition, has a stage of cleaning up, which is not pretty. You want to get out of a breakup, and maybe for 2 months or 6 months you tell yourself you've done this, or someone done this to yourself, someone done something to you, and there is a process of forgiveness, for example, or a process of rebuilding something that is more true to this new lesson that is assimilated now. Now, that is not pretty. And what you need to learn on any spiritual path is that successes and progress and transformation is not for free. For example, having this conversation now might be, and I really hope it is, inspirational for some people. It's not enough. I call it the fairy tale part. You know, you hear the fairy tale. This is possible. You read the book, and there's this is possible, and you could be that happy. You could have this amount of orgasm and so on. Whatever promises there is fantastic. It gives you the idea of what may be or what you can become. Now, from the fairy tale to the reality, there is what I call spiritual sweat. You cannot achieve anything in this world without putting the work, without making the effort, without really having some discipline behind, so that that progress and that accumulation of knowledge and practice and understanding, even a certain inner alchemy, I would call it, a certain inner transformation related to energies and emotions and mind. Without that, it's impossible. So that's why, yes, listen to those lectures and those podcasts and go to those courses and so on, but take the homework at home, take it with you, because without that effort is not enough.
So nothing will happen unless you practice.
Yes. So I would say maybe related to the practice was the disciplining of the mind and the disciplining of the body, and of course there were some moments where the body couldn't do some things. It's like in any sports, in any kind of working with your body, you need to go past some limitations, you need to insist and acquire those skills. Relationships, again, we have amazing gifts, and we have amazing, how should I say, let's call them gifts. We have some, let's say, the beginner's luck, let's call it the beginner's grace. And we have those moments of beauty and effortless bliss. And then we need to bring the sweat. We need to bring, not the sweat, sorry. It's maybe sounds a bit too sportish. Maybe my gym exercise nowadays is a little bit more present. But the effort, the conscious effort. So I would say any kind of hardship needs to be doubled by a certain determination and willingness and clarity why you make those efforts and why you want to continue. Otherwise, you give up. And of course, you find something else that might be exciting or might be more novel. Yeah.
But is it like crossing a no man's land from one, if you like, known version of yourself to a new version of yourself?
It is. Luckily, most of us nowadays, we practice in communities, we are part of some courses, maybe have guidance from our teachers and from people we trust, and from even the 1,000-year knowledge, reading those books and so on. So I have a lot of inspiration and support, luckily. And there's not so much a no-man land as long as you're willing to also listen to others and be inspired by others and have friends that maybe been through. So I think a big advantage of being part of a course like we have here in Tara, the Yoga and Tantra course, and another course is Kashmir Shaivism, is that you don't have to be alone in this. So in a way, it's a no man's land because it's the first time when you discover it, but there are some milestones that can be flagged, and you can ask for help and support when you reach those, and at least you can ask the question and say, okay, I've reached this, I'm in a dead end, what do I do? Or I'm suffering now emotionally because of this and this in the relationship, or I just broke up, and how shall I deal with the whole thing? So definitely we have, in any spiritual tradition, I'm sure there is a lot of technology, spiritual technology and terminology, and a lot of tools that can be used. Even the word Tantra is the tools for expansion, the tools for uniting, is the set of methodology which will help you. So on one side you have the no man's land, you have the whole universe to be explored, and it could be daunting in the beginning because there's a lot there, a lot of stuff that you already have, a lot of stuff that you don't know. But nevertheless, you also have some marking on the path, you have some signage, you have some spots where now I have a choice, now I can use this. Yeah.
I remember very much feeling that I was losing my personality, and I actually quite liked my personality. I was quite attached to it.
Aren't we all?
What do you do when that happens?
I think a big part of any journey is a certain feeling of humbleness and understanding that as proud as we are knowing these things and being attached to the things we've done, and even the successes, it's one of the probably hardest part to overcome, is that there's so much more to explore. So I'll just give you a simple example. You read a book and you read about Ramakrishna's states of ecstasy. And then any sane and practical person asks, okay, in comparison with that, where do I stand? Now, when you put yourself on a scale from me to infinity, or me to bliss, or me to ecstasy, or me to enlightenment, then you realize there's so much more to explore. And then you kind of make room for those experiences. You kind of say, okay, now I'm busy, busy, busy. I just finished the day. Now is the time to contemplate. And even to ask yourself, okay, what were the good things that happened in the day? How much of my spirituality or consciousness I brought in my day-to-day events and interactions? And of course, the more we bring that, how should I say, self-awareness and contemplation in our life, also we bring this humbleness, we make room for that growth. We kind of accept there is more to the truth that you have it, to kind of understand that whatever truth you have in this very moment, unless you really are in that state of bliss and you know it, it's a partial truth. And then you constantly interact with the world in the respect of bringing more knowledge and letting other people teach you and being inspired by others, being inspired by even other spiritual traditions, spiritual paths and stories and so on. So there is a constant betterment, I would say. And we need to be courageous because indeed we are very attached to what we know. And I'm the teacher, I'm the practitioner, I know all these things. But hang on, there have been people who went all the way, so maybe they have something valuable to say. And then, of course, we learn this openness and humbleness for other higher teaching and truths, forms of truth that you can let in. It's like in the story with the disciple went to the master, and I think it's the Zen tradition. I apologize if I don't remember exactly where it comes from, and the disciple, the student comes and says, okay, I want you to tell me about this. And the master says, okay, let's have a tea. And he starts to pour the tea in the cup of the disciple, and continues to pour and overflows and goes on the table, on the lap of and the disciple gets quite touched. Can't you see that it's full? And the master says, you ask me about the truth and about spirituality, but the problem is you come with the cup full. Your cup is full, so you need to empty your cup before you want to fill it up with new knowledge. So I would say all of us, we go through that, and of course we get sometimes even proud of our own spiritual knowledge and the life experience and so on. And it's good to meditate, and it's good to help others, and it's good to put yourself in the service of others and so on, because kind of getting ourselves away from our pedestal, or self-built pedestal, gives us a certain, how shall I say, proportion or a certain reference to what we can become, a certain, I don't know how to call it.
Out of all the spiritual studies you could have had, you chose Tantra. What was it that resonated with you, with Tantra?
Probably I was quite lucky in a way. I clicked straight away with this knowledge. Probably one of the most tantalizing part of Tantra is the practicality. Of course, I like the big words and the spiritual words and the big texts and so on, but I cannot relate to something that cannot be brought in practice in the daily life. So, for example, yes, it's nice to hear about Zen. It's a fantastic path for those who have that mind or mindset or even the outside context to be able to meditate in that way. But I would say London 2024 in the city center, trying to practice Zen probably is a bit difficult. Now, what else can you practice in a busy city, in a busy life with a job and other commitments? And I liked how Tantra brought this spiritual knowledge in every single action, in every single activity. That's why I would say Tantra is the science of life, or 24/7 practice. Not that it is by default just because you know the word, but it's possible to build up to that level of awareness and practicality of that knowledge, because it can start very simply with attitudes, or the way you see life, or the way you see the others, the way you stay conscious in every single action. So those tools of bringing spirituality in everyday life, and that for me was very, very tempting. Plus, I'm come from growing up in kind of technical studies and computers and physics and so on. I really like the analogy or the link and the bridge towards science. And for me, it's very important to be able to explain those spiritual terms in practical things. For example, term of resonance. Of course, resonance belongs to physics, at least the material part of it, and then that's easily translatable into the emotions and mind and interactions and our position in the universe and so on. So for me, that was very, very fulfilling to learn this kind of scientific way of spirituality and the practical way of bringing that in everyday life.
So would you say that the tantric spiritual path is like installing a new operating system?
I like your analogies with computers. Do you speak my language? Not necessarily installing a new one. I would say you need to have a massive breakthrough and to clean up, to cleanse the past and to be a new you all of a sudden. But I would say you update things. I mentioned a bit earlier the truth. What is the truth? Of course, the truth is starting from a material object like this, and then we could look at it from the physics point of view, and then extends to the subtlety of what water is, and the glass and the material world. So the truth is very complex. So right now, my operating system, my spiritual operating system, can process that much information and understands the information filtered by the things I know. Now, if I leave room for updates, then this truth also can get updated, and I have an experience that I can translate it in life, and then my new operating system now can handle the information, the interaction in a superior way, what I consider superior from the previous stage. Once in a while, indeed, we have, and sometimes it's forced on us. The universe is wise enough to push us forward when we get stuck. We experience through pain. Maybe some traumatic experience can wipe and demolish, maybe overnight, some system of beliefs or some wrong relation with ourselves, and we have a clean slate and we could rebuild. Most of the time, this is a progression. We have updates, security updates, software updates, operating system updates, and so on. So we do work in small increments, and I think it's very important to accept they're important, because what we attempt on any spiritual path is to jump from the ordinary, from the limited, to something that is transpersonal. Call it God, call it the universe, call it universal intelligence. However, it's a massive leap, which is, I think, for the level of evolution of planet Earth in the third millennia, is quite an impossible jump. So that's why we need methodology, we need techniques, and that's why, for example, yoga practice, meditation practice, even maybe we'll open this subject if we have time, the interaction in the intimacy, all those, they should have something practical to work with from one level to another.
And you spoke earlier about purification, and of course that does apply to the operating system. You know, you need to get rid of the garbage.
Antivirus.
The antivirus, there you go. Can you talk more about that? Because that must be something that you came up against early on your spiritual path.
For example, one of the things that in Tantra we consider needs to be updated is our relationship with pleasure and fulfillment, relationship with sexuality. We are surrounded and constantly, I would say, purified by our relationship with sexuality, even the way we sexualize things in advertising and even in relationships, the pornography industry and so on. So we are constantly bombarded, we even subject ourselves sometimes willingly, we can call it willingly, to things that are not necessarily useful for our, what we called right from the beginning, this expansion of this betterment of consciousness. Then we need to have those times and places where we can get rid or put on pause and have another perspective. For example, I found very useful for myself and for our students the retreats, where for 7 days you are together with other people, like-minded people, like-hearted people, and you have the chance to submerge yourself in a pool of connections and knowledge that is isolated and somehow protected from the environment. Now, those leaps of understanding that may happen during those 7 days or 10 days or 3 days may have a big impact in your life, because you can take that and say, okay, if I looked at intimacy and I always objectified the other one, my lover, always looked for some gains and always had a very pragmatic or even a very, let's say, selfish way of enjoying pleasure in their interaction and somehow building a certain dependency in relationship. Now I know it's possible differently. So how do I bring that knowledge in my life? So we have a duty towards ourselves to extract ourselves from this constant noise and constant agitation, to say, okay, is there better to a relationship, to being at work, to wanting to become more spiritual is a better way than just this maybe obsessive way or lazy way or an unconscious way or simply thinking that doing nothing will take us there. So I think we have a duty, and even more so in our day and age where I don't think spirituality is on the table. Luckily, it's an emerging thing for maybe 20, 30 years where we speak more and more about spirituality and holistic approaches and healing and so on. It starts to become more mainstream, but nevertheless is not yet the level of the consciousness of the planet. So if it is not, then what is our contribution towards ourselves and everyone else? And that's why I think the personal work is very important, and purification, starting with the purification of the body, for example, diet, purification of energies and so on, which is practices, Tai Chi, yoga practice, then of the mind, meditation and so on, and having a certain set of values that we constantly align to, we strive for in order to grow into that, to becoming that. I think part of it is to have some clarity to what we want to be, and then to find the methodology to get there.
Did you realize that you would be coming up against your own moral values when you started Tantra?
I'm still coming against that. Every single, probably not every month, but I do have moments when the foundation is shaken, and of course those things that are not valuable will fall off, and sometimes it's confusing and it's a bit difficult, and you need to rebuild right from scratch. Some other times maybe happens on higher levels, but definitely there were moments when I had to give up the old and embrace the new, and it's not easy. It's a difficult process, and it's not necessarily difficult because you have to do something, but again, it's the attachment to the old, it's the attachment to the defaults and to the routine and to the people. And for example, one of the things you mentioned a bit earlier is if I'm becoming a new person, now I cannot work with my old friends or colleagues from school or primary school. You know, it seems like I'm stepping in a world that is populated by other people, and it's quite daunting again, looking to a new life where you leave behind quite a lot. And sometimes you even need to ask the question, is that worth it? And this is one of the scares we have. It's now not wanting to listen to thrash metal, no offense for those who listen to those, and choosing to listen to classical music definitely will make me be around other type of people and a different community and so on. So there are choices you need to make, and sometimes it's difficult, yes.
Can you give us some examples of choices that you had to make that were difficult? I know for myself, giving up alcohol was a difficult one. Being around friends who were very much into popping Prosecco corks and wondering what's happened to the old Vivian.
Yeah, probably I was a bit lucky with this, especially with diet. You know, for me, choosing to become vegetarian was a decision taken overnight. You know, my brother came home and said, "I'm vegetarian." I said, "Okay, fine." And that was 30 years ago. But I would say, yeah, for example, social environment, being, for example, part of school, you know, having school friends and friends in general, and having to step away. It was a transition, of course. And fortunately, I found a community of very open hearts and very bright people who I connected with very easily. Now, I remembered probably the first encounter when some of the members of my family started to practice yoga, for example, and it was a bit of a shock. You know, it's like, oh, what is all this new things? You know, I never believed in anything, and I was this kind of quite rebellious teenager. And stepping into this new world, realizing, yes, for example, alcohol is not very good for your body, or luckily I didn't have to give up other substances and so on. But there were some choices, and yes, it seems like you step out. But even sexuality, if you speak about sexuality, you know, a new way of being. One of the biggest challenges when you speak about Tantra is the control over the energies. And the question is, what do we give up? I give up all my attachment to pleasure, the way I know it, and then I need to step into something new. And then you realize that's not a free step. You need to make a choice and you need to make efforts to get there. And the question comes, is it worth it, to, let's say, train in this way of making love, for example? And of course, you need to make some steps and to take those decisions. It seems a sacrifice in the beginning. Of course, the outcome is so much bigger and rewarding that when you look back, that was the best decision. But it's something you need to, is those parts of old and unneeded that needs to be left behind. And sometimes they're very much connected with people and environments and so on, for sure. Now, there is another thing I want to say, which is, let's say, kind of peace for the mind of anyone listening to this podcast. There is something called the unifying factor, and whatever seems to be dividing or the schism that you feel that happens in your life is just a temporary phase, because on the other end, in the moment when you start to get closer to who you are and to express yourself in a more natural way and to somehow appeal to those values and principles that are now very vivid, also is a bridge back to the old world, but in a different way. And then instead of just being a mindless part of a very big machine, you become a conscious factor to bring something valuable in those environments, in those interactions with old friends and so on. So it becomes a beautiful, you bring back something beautiful, something that you developed, and it's part of what it's your gift to the others. So I would call it the love that naturally starts to manifest in the moment when this expansion happens and becomes a unifying factor. So it's less and less of a sacrifice. What you leave behind becomes more and more of accepting yourself and working with yourself, but also being translated in very natural and meaningful interactions with everyone else, regardless what they are on a spiritual awakening. Yeah.
So if I understand, it's instead of judging, criticizing, or putting people into boxes, or making them wrong and you're right, these kinds of interchanges, you actually would go to an event, a social event, with a loving feeling in your heart.
For sure.
Yeah, and wanting to listen to that person, to know who they are.
And giving them the credit for what they are. So even if it's one of the biggest dangers on a spiritual journey, is what you can call the spiritual ego. Is the spiritual persona that you build, and you are very much convinced and becomes quite dogmatic if that's exaggerated. And even a certain pride that wants to impose the truth or your own truth, whatever that truth is, on others. And it's quite ugly and very disconnecting. Once you go past that, or once we have a bigger picture of what this spiritual journey means and what spirituality means, then we start to understand that there is not good and bad. There is not spiritual and non-spiritual. There is not separation and elite and the pleb and the all knowledgeable and the ignorance. Everyone has inside that spark of perfection. And once you see that, even if you see it past their own, limitations or their own hardships and inner conflicts, then there is not up and down, there is not bad and good. You can connect for what that person is truly beyond all those masks and problems and so on. It's such a joy of being able to be human. So I think part of the spiritual journey is to understand that you still need to be human in the whole transhumanist journey, in the transpersonal journey. Part of you is that soul that still wants to connect. And it's a great pleasure for me to interact with people. It doesn't matter if they heard about spirituality or Tantra or Yoga, it doesn't matter, or totally different traditions, because it's so much reservoir of knowledge embedded in their life. They just need to pay attention. And sometimes to read between lines, because, of course, some might seem inexperienced, but it's some other things that are so valuable and so beautiful and so sparkling that you have to acknowledge.
Now, going back to your journey, how did it help you mature as a boy? Because you were young when you first discovered Yoga and Tantra.
Yes, it was a long time in the making, and I have to say probably would have been much harder without having structure and having this teaching handy and all the practical methodology. I would say part of it was the personal strive for doing the practice and becoming better and slowly understand. Part of it was the relationships. I think relationships and love have the chance to transform us as long as we want to do that, and as long as we embrace that as a transforming experience, not just a free ride. A big part of this transformation was being in the service of others. So I think once we step out of our comfort zone and the little dramas that we sometimes, big dramas, have inside, and we start to help others, then it gives us a bit of perspective of what can be your contribution. So I think a combination of all these made that step. I remember coming to UK, and very soon it's 25 years, and wanting to do these things that I do now, and embracing this experience with all the challenges, starting from the jobs and building up the school and so on. All those challenges, like my dear Foka that you interviewed a bit earlier, he likes to say, forging a new personality, forging a new consciousness within. And I think the more we embrace this process of transformation, first of all, it becomes, or it seems less painful and less, let's say, less difficult. But also it increases the pace in which we can absorb and digest those experiences. So I would say the more we do, and the more we embrace ourselves and we want to be part of it, it becomes easy for us. But the more we help others, it becomes an experience in itself, a very transformational experience. So yeah, a lot of things to do now. If you speak about relationships and the way masculinity nowadays, it's very much stuck in a perpetual teenage period or boyish period. The transformation happened through relationships and attitude towards intimacy. So that was a very big lesson, and it's still work in progress, and I'm very keen to learn more and to bring even more of that conscious masculinity within, to grow into that. And relationships plus the practice, the yoga meditation practice and all the other tantric practices helped me greatly in achieving this. Also the community of men, those brothers on the path that I constantly connect with, and they're like the rocks of my existence, even my biological brother, but not only my spiritual brothers. All this helped quite a lot to escape that, what I would say, the gravitational pull of pleasure and easy way and dealing with things by default, and shifting into this conscious way of approaching masculinity. Going
back to the forging, it sounds to me like there's quite a lot of suffering, some hard work, a need for discipline, maybe a need to, keep the light at the end of the tunnel shining. What was it? Have you been through some tough times?
Yeah, definitely. Now, of course, relationships, and I had quite a few long relationships. Those in themselves are good times and tough times. It's a work in progress. Now, as you were just formulating the question, I'm just thinking of one particular part of our year, which is 1 week every year in Polarity Retreat, where we put men separate and women separate, and men suffer, in inverted commas. They suffer, they wake up early, they don't eat much in the morning, and they have to do the yoga practice, and we have serious talks, and we talk about this. But then, interestingly enough, this forging, which comes through effort and a certain bonding of men through doing things together, a certain brotherhood sense that is built through being together, talking about things, sharing things, and having this courage to escape the little, let's say, bubbles of our personalities and be together with the others. It has a very interesting effect. So you may say, okay, I go in a retreat and my partner is on the other side and I only see them for, 5 minutes a day or half an hour a day, 2 hours a day, and it's like, okay, why am I here? Interestingly enough, that effort is paid off with some magical moments of interaction, because in those moments, forging maybe a new way, or even gaining the courage of expressing in a certain way, or even taking some spiritual notions and applying to what's supposed to be conscious masculinity of our life, and then taking it and putting it in practice, is a miraculous thing. So in a way you pay a price, but you get a very good product. Yeah, so the product is, you know, that forging and that effort always has a great result. And I would say the more serious we are about the effort you want to put into something, is like in business. The more success you have in long run. For example, having an easy way of consuming pleasure and having a quickie, that's one experience, and it's great. It gives you that kind of result. Or having a tantric conscious interaction, and there is some effort, there is some preparation, there are some stages that are required in order to be in the right state of mind. And then from outside it might seem quite a big effort, even a sacrifice to your own instincts and desires and a quick fulfillment. But then what comes from that, the result, I would say, is not tens of thousand-fold more precious and valuable. And of course, in the moment when you have those results, at least once or twice or three times, you start to put in the scale, in the balance, this is what I get by the defaults and the easy way, this is what I get through through efforts and this constant wish to improve, then you can make an informed decision. The problem is nowadays, people are not patient enough to have the two sides. So when you say, okay, in order to be successful in meditation, you may need to meditate for 2 months every day for 15 minutes. I say, no, I don't have 15 minutes a day for that. But then we have 2.5 hours statistically to scroll Facebook and so on. So the question is, we don't know what you lose if you don't do that. So in the moment when you try it for maybe a week or 2 weeks, you start to see some results, and then you are aware of those efforts being needed, that forging of the mind, of the personality, of the emotions are needed in order to enjoy life even on a better scale. Another example, relaxation. I practice in class, or I practice 10 minutes of relaxation. Is that a waste of time? I wouldn't know. If you practice relaxation for 10 minutes a day for 2 weeks, then you have an answer for yourself. So yes, the forging is very important, especially for men. There is, of course, all of us, you need to forge in life, and the women have different ways, in our opinion. When you speak about tantric practices, we do believe there are some key differences between men and women, and for men, you need to take it seriously. You need to own it. Your masculinity, your decisions, your desires, everything. And that's the conscious way to grow. And sometimes it's tough.
So when you first heard about Tantra, did you think, first of all, I want to be a better lover?
It always is. I think for 99% of people, that is the selling point. And it's a good one, of course, you know. Sexuality sells, why not? But it can become easily a hindrance. When Tantra is approached just from the sexuality point of view, considering the sexuality, if we were to put a chakra chart here, sexuality is only 1/7 of our consciousness, then we may lose a lot, we may miss a lot of what Tantra offers. Tantra is a full package. It takes us all the way to perfection. And when obsessed just about sexuality and even a selfish way of approaching sexuality, we actually not even practicing Tantra. We completely deny the values that Tantra promotes. But definitely it's a selling point. So if I practice Tantra to become a better lover, then it's a good way to start. Now, one of the things that is missed in Tantra, what means a lover? Because if you say sex performant is something, when you say lover, it involves love. So if you say a better lover, that also involves love and involves really wanting to love someone, and love in itself is an experience that expands the consciousness. So taking it seriously when it comes to loving, it's an amazing, a very fast track to transformation and to expansion. So yes, it's a very good way to start, but of course Tantra offers everything in between. So Tantra, like any other spiritual tradition, will take you all the way up. So the more we accept Tantra and we take it seriously for what it offers, then intimacy and sexuality is just a part of it. And even that, if we want to do it properly, we need to explore the rest. We cannot do it.
I'm getting the idea that Tantra is a selection of tools, equipment, if you like, to equip a human being for evolution. Would that be a correct description?
That's the translation of the term. Tantra. The tra is the tools, the collection of tools, and the tan is the expansion, the weaving, the connection, the unifying factor. So it's a collection of tools for expanding the consciousness. We have it as a definition, as a translated definition in our first course. Of course, people need to know what they're signing up for. So it's very correct. Now, what you need to understand that the tantric practices do not limit just to yoga practice or breathing exercises or dancing or sexuality or intimacy or just meditation. The tantric practices have in this collection everything related to attitudes and awareness. It's a way of being, and that can be trained with tools, and it's very important, especially when we don't know anything. It's very difficult to relate to attitudes or a certain awakened, updated consciousness. Then you need to get there, or at least you need to have some previews. Now, the tools will allow us to train the traits, the qualities, the skills. Now, those skills, from my point of view, from what I understand from Tantra, is that Tantra is a way of living, is a conscious way of living in which everything matters. So, my attitude at work, my attitude when I have this conversation with you. You know, I could be here just to impress you or just to become famous on the internet, but I'm here and I'm enjoying the many other things that happen subtly here. The friendship and the love and the affection and even this amazing ability to connect based on information and new knowledge. So Tantra expands and becomes a 24/7 practice. It becomes a way of living. Is not a dogma. Is not something that is you have to believe in so that you reap some benefits, but rather is a way of training some traits so that they become effective in everyday life. I gave you the example with relaxation. Relaxation can be a 10 minutes practice every day, and it stops there. Stress, stress, stress. 10 minutes relaxation. Stress, stress, stress. That's one way of living life. Or stress, stress, stress. Holiday, stress, stress, stress. That's a little bit limited to just that holiday, that external context. Now, if relaxation is something that I can practice over those 10 minutes when I have my yoga mat in that quiet room, is there a value to it in my everyday life? So can I take relaxation as a background attitude into work when I'm talking to my boss, when I need to work fast and efficient to deliver a project, to meet a deadline, but nevertheless not to get agitated inside? So is there a quality to mind efficiency and relaxation at the same time? So this is where it becomes, I would say, quite extraordinary. What can I take from a 10 minutes practice, 1 hour practice, 2 hours practice from my tantric? What can I take from my intimacy and bring it at work? Or when I commit to work? Or when I meet my friends and I'm having fun? Is there a higher quality to human interactions, to my inner works than the defaults? And this is where the Tantra practice comes in.
So Bogdan, what about the defaults? How do you cope with that on the spiritual path?
I don't think you cope with the defaults. I think the bigger challenge is to observe the defaults, to find the defaults. For example, deep grooves in our subconscious coming from childhood, or from previous relationships, from failures, from successes, all of them are defaults and they're very deeply buried inside. So now, once you become aware of the defaults, it's much easier because you know what to do, how to deal with them. So also part of the tantric tradition, like any other tradition, is the introspection and contemplation. Is like, how am I today? Why did I react in that way? How this makes me feel like this over and over again? Why am I impulsive? Why am I shy? Why am I afraid? So all these defaults are very much deeply buried, and that's why, for example, a conversation will not help. Maybe a session of therapy will not help fully. Now, when it's the session or the practice is repeated, and then you get to the bottom of it, and you understand the cause, then it's just the first step. Then the second step is, what are those practical things I can do? For example, clearing my subconscious, whatever methods you want to use. For example, positive ideas, working with force ideas or positive thinking, or even asking for help. That repetition will make sure the defaults go away. For example, meditation or the yoga practice, that repetition will create new grooves. Now, Of course, could be good defaults and bad defaults. One of the defaults I spoke a bit earlier is the spiritual pride. Now I'm on default of being the teacher. Look at me. Now, do you hold the ultimate truth? No. So is that a good default? No. And then you need to give it up. Then you need to update your software and your attitude towards yourself and the way you relate to spirituality, even to people, even people you may guide and help.
What would be a good default?
Good default, you wake up and do 1 hour of yoga before you go to work. But even that has a little danger. If it becomes mechanical, you still don't reap all the benefits. So guarding against the default is to be very aware of choosing to do the practice, knowing what are the benefits, being very aware during the practice, and you extract all the value of that. If the default says, I'm doing it because it's good or it's trendy, you strip away some benefits. So that's why awareness is one of the key words in the Tantra practice. Awareness needs to guard everything that we do, in every aspect of life.
And quietening the mind, the insistent conversation from the ego.
The second part, because sometimes the mind needs to be noisy. I need to express some ideas. Now, who is initiating this conversation? A very proud ego. Let me tell you how knowledgeable I am. Or I'm here with my friend Vivian and having a wonderful conversation and the heart being there and really being connected and having a good time together and exploring this concept. So again, is the quality of awareness. The mind can still say things, but the mind becomes the tool of a higher awareness. Even a conversation like this can be guided by the mind and all the knowledge that we have, or it can become a tool for the inspiration that we receive as we talk. And that's something I'm not prepared for. It's something that is a gift that I'm only receiving in the moment when I let the universe also speak through me. So again, there are different defaults that can be good, but also hindering some probably even more meaningful things that you can say or connect with.
Now, are you willing to share with us your biggest mistake and your biggest learning, and maybe also your biggest success so far?
Probably it's hard to say the biggest mistakes because there are many. Of course, probably the easiest to remember is the, let's say, relationships. When we break up, and big mistakes would be completely ignoring and blaming the other, and it happened repeatedly, and I had to put a stop to that. Mistakes related to routine in practice, and that is very insidious because that comes slowly in it, and then you find yourself 3 months in and you say, why it doesn't work? Because I'm still doing it, and that's another type of mistake. Mistakes in doing things for work or doing things in a community, where again comes out of duty and doesn't come out of love and self-giving. So there are many, and I would say the antidote of this is continuous practice with oneself. The big questions that need to be asked once in a while, not just in the moments of crisis. Why am I doing this? I come here in Tara to teach every evening. Now, is this part of my pride journey? Is this part of my fame journey? Is this part of my career journey? Or is it just a simple act of helping others? And I need to ask the question every single time, because otherwise if it becomes a job, then it's not something I should supposed to do. I cannot share spiritual knowledge doing it from a selfish reason. Yeah, it's contradictory. It cannot be a business.
Yes. Now, turning to relationships, how does Tantra help relationships?
I think Tantra holds a very big gift for relationships nowadays, but I think in any time in history, because it looks pleasure and intimacy in the face, and it doesn't do it with shame, and doesn't do it with dogma, and doesn't do it with limitations. Considering that pleasure, intimacy, love is part of life and is part of relationship, we shouldn't shy away from exploring higher or more valuable ways of doing them. So for example, love. Is love limited to just comfort and dependency and, I don't know, again, defaults based on comfort and security? Is sexuality a fleeting act of impulsiveness and desire for another? Or are there more layers to these experiences, to these even, let's say, way of feeling them inside. And Tantra provides tools. So we like sexuality, or we like the pleasure. Is there a better way? Yes, there is a better way. For example, lasting longer. Or is there a value in investing a lot in relationships? Yes, the relationship can become the engine of evolution, but not when we nag one another, not when we hate one another, not when we just depend on one another. When the two people are very much strong and independent and very loving and willing to put something into a relationship, to give the best of their hearts into the relationship grows strong and grows spiritual and becomes even a platform for their own evolution. And of course, relationships and love become a tremendous help on the path. Now, Tantra can be practiced alone. Don't get me wrong. There's all the methodology to be done at anywhere, even if you are alone. But relationships can be helped by the Tantric values and by the Tantric practices, for sure.
And is it possible through Tantra to have a long-lasting, loving relationship?
Definitely. And I've been in a long relationship now. So we've been together for 14 years, and there is no conflict between Tantra and long relation. By the opposite, Tantra can bring even more intimacy in loving relationships. I would say that Tantra teaches us how to unite in relationships based on spiritual principles rather than just human attachments and let's say more gregarious and social norms. So I think that's a huge addition to anyone's life. I would say bringing more happiness and freedom, and even freedom to express of who we are, and desire to even grow in the relationship, even in ourselves. It's a huge addition to life. So Tantra gives us all these tools and the knowledge. Yeah.
And have you shared stories with the men's groups that you guide about your relationships, the trials and tribulations, the successes?
I think this is one of the beautiful, I would say, gifts we give to one another as men when we meet and we share these things. The fact that I wished you didn't have to go through this. I wish that my mistake stands here for your proof of what not to do. And I also wished right from the beginning of my tantric path I had this group of men, which I didn't. I remember my girlfriend asking around her male friends to bring some hints of how to improve sexuality and eroticism and to improve love. So it was this constant search for things, but not having too many people to ask. And of course, you can find things in books and so on. Is not enough, I would say. So yes, definitely sharing stories and sharing all these things is very important. And I don't think many times I'm in a position of teaching things, but I'm rather in a position of sharing things, because everyone shares very valuable things. And I'm very keen to hear the stories, because I also want to learn what not to do. Also want to embrace the success stories and to even ask the question, what did you do to get there so quickly and so amazingly? So I think it's a big part of this is this courage to share our life experiences. And I do have many stories, for sure. Many stories of failures, and I say, don't do that. And probably you will do, because you have to go through this, probably not. Probably you're wiser than me and faster. But the stories of success are amazing. And I find that just opening the gate for sharing, also people realize the value they carry within. So, for example, we're sitting in a men's group. Yes, I practiced Tantra for, let's say, almost 30 years, but I don't think your experience is less valuable in any way. I think your experience brought now, even if it was a challenge or a failure, I think it's as important as many stories I can give you of, I don't know, some spiritual successes is as important.
That sounds wonderful. So, just staying with relationships, what is the role of attraction and pleasure?
Attraction and pleasure in Tantra is important. Of course, you can get away without, but considering it's part of life and everything that we do, I think it bears a big weight in the way we do things. Now, in relationships, part of the relationship, amongst many, is erotic fulfillment and fulfilled pleasure and pleasant interactions. And what Tantra adds to this equation is how pleasure can become a very valuable fuel for what we defined right from the beginning of this conversation, the expansion of the consciousness or a spiritual journey. So instead of being something that is consumed or something that can limit a person, for example, sexual obsessions leading to addictions and so on, using the same energy with different attitudes. I even mentioned the word eros, so bringing eros as opposed to sex, bringing intimacy as opposed to selfish consuming the pleasure. All these things will lead to a different type of relationship, different type of fulfillment. Now, one of the dangers of instinctual relationship to pleasure is the fact that once consumed, very little is left behind. It's one of the sad stories of long-term relationships where people love each other and they grow into more love and they get closer together and they become better friends, but they lose the erotic attraction, they lose the spark, they lose the fascination with one another. And it's a very big price to pay in a relationship. Many relationships, they end up in kind of formal interactions and yes, loving and being there and supporting each other, but there is let's say a sad part which is not addressed, which is that bubbleness and that spark that comes from this erotic intimacy. And I think it's a big part. And for those in a tantric relationship, you cannot say you have a tantric relationship ignoring this. You could have a good friendship, you could have good brotherly, sisterly love, or lovers in the term of being there for one another, but a tantric relationship also means, if you want to include this, means this conscious relationship with pleasure and with intimacy. And here is this key concepts related to erotic amorous continence, which means to control the energies, to extract from these energies a higher purpose. So what continence means is to control and to give a higher meaning to that energy. And one of the biggest questions and fears and skepticism comes, okay, if I give up this instinctual, pleasure, this very spontaneous thing, what do I get? And of course, what you get is much, much better, but you need to have the courage to try, and at least to give it the chance to have that experience a few times in order to judge, because otherwise it's difficult even to hear it. It's one of those things, when you speak with men especially, we speak about multiple orgasms, and the fact that you don't need to ejaculate to have an orgasm. There is a big confusion nowadays. The Tantric said, okay, you can have that orgasm, but you don't need to pay the price. Actually, you can have more of them, and you could last longer and make your lover happier, but without having to pay a hefty price every single time when you have that orgasm. That's very challenging, very, very challenging, especially when you have a habitual relationship with pleasure. And then we had that as men maybe for 15, 20 years of our lives, and then Tantra said there is another way, and that's a true act of courage to try something new.
And in terms of women, what is the other way regarding women?
I think for all of us, and then I'll come back to women, for all of us, I think it's one of the things that are not so much spoken in Tantra, at least the imported version of Tantra in the West. It's the importance of love in intimacy. I think for both men and women is to understand need of love in this intimate interaction, in a love relationship. Now, on the women's side, I think the part when it comes to pleasure, women are much more equipped to be fulfilled and have more pleasure and have multiple orgasms. With the women, the conversation is like, that exists, you can do it anyway. Where is your lover? Where is the man that can make you happy in that way? And then I think on the women's side, in my opinion, of course, is that women, of course, need to be aware of it and want to do these things and to explore these things, but also to stop compromising, to go in relationships that are not fulfilling, and to even notice when a relationship starts to suffer because of lack of fulfillment, and to address it, and to have the courage to say, okay, listen, we are not happy in this way. Do you think we can do differently, or we can return to that spark from the beginning? And then I think it's a need of honoring their own femininity by not compromising in relationships that are not fulfilling.
And is there any magic wand, or is there any shortcut in these aspirations? Is there anything that you experience? Any tips before we go?
No, there is no shortcuts. Nevertheless, there are moments of grace, and I think those moments of grace are easily felt when you are in love. And I think they're very precious moments to behold and to hold dear and to try to hold as fresh and as long as you can, because they do hold a certain gift, and even remembering them and bringing them in the present moment, it's a very good practice. But I would say there is a constant need of being conscious in a relationship, and sometimes it comes with efforts. Now, the easy way and the hint I would like to share with everyone is that try to stay in the love. That's the easiest way. Now, it's easier said than done, because again, the defaults are creeping in, and the ego is very insidious to kind of consume that and take advantage. And the other one is when things are already a little bit broken or a little bit unfulfilling, and is fixing things, which is a bit harder, not impossible. Now, the takeaway is that Tantra, the core of it, promotes love and connection, and the connection of the two souls. So I think once people understand this and they remember this, because all of us have had this experience, everything else is a natural consequence in which you have enough motivation to put the effort. So even if it's not an easy way or a free passage or a free pass, I would say that love makes things much easier. Even the effort becomes, in a way, pleasant, because at least you know what the goal is.
And if you go back 30 years and see how you were then and compare yourself now, what differences do you see? How has Tantra changed your life?
I would say owning our own life will make life much easier. And when I say this, I'm referring to choices, for example, having a job, being in a relationship, choices of breaking up, giving up. The more conscious we are, and the more aware we are that we are at the helm of our boat, the easier it becomes. So if I would take ownership of everything I'm doing in every moment, and then things are easier. Now, those cycles of suffering and healing and suffering again and so on, many times are a result of not owning fully what we do and what we choose to do.
So what would you say to your self, if yourself was in the room now?
I would say stop blaming others and do the homework. Before you come out and open your mouth to say something critical or judging or projecting your problems on other people, first of all, look inside. And then when you fix those things inside, then you are in a position to share or to tell or to even try to fix. But until then, just stay quiet in a corner, ask help if you need help, and then own what is there, know that it is self-made, and even if it looks so unfair and unjust from outside, it's still something for you to learn. Once you understand that, then of course you could do things in a different way.
Bogdan, thank you for sharing your experience with us. It's been most enlightening. Thank you.
Thank you again, Vivian, for meeting you.